As you learned in the Group It starter that we just went through, you can combine objects in Tinkercad to both create new objects with bigger parts or to cut away parts of an object as well. Those two methods are called the additive and subtractive methods. So, for example, if I wanted to make something that has both a box and a cylinder, I could take those two objects and maybe I want to make this one a little bit bigger and a little bit taller, and maybe I want to move this over some, and maybe I want to make those two objects join together, and I want to make them into one object. So I can group those two things together in one of two ways. I could click on the first one and hold down Shift and click on the second one and then group them, or I could drag a selection box around them. So I could click and hold on my mouse, drag a box around them, and that would select them both at once. Because these are both solid objects, when I click on the group button up here, what you're going to notice is that they both turn the same color because they're now one object. And if I rotate around, I can see that even though I can see some lines that separate those things, they are actually one object. So I could use the view cube to orbit around and see that. I could use my home button to get back to my regular home view, and I could zoom in if I really want to. If I click on this and drag it around, you're going to see that it behaves like one object because now, according to Tinkercad, it is one object. That's called the additive method. It's when we take one or more shapes, join them together, and add on from one shape using one or more other shapes. So that's the additive method. Now, another method that we have is called the subtractive method. You can probably already guess that that means taking away from the object. To do that, we are going to use a hole. Now, Tinkercad gives us some basic holes over here. It gives us a box hole and a cylinder hole. If I wanted to carve out some space in the middle of that thing that I just made, I could do that by dragging out a cylinder hole. Maybe I'm going to use this cone here to drag that up. So I'll click on the cone and drag up some, and then I'll push this back over some. And you can see kind of, whoops, instead of pushing it, I accidentally resized it. I'm going to push this over instead here. And you can see when I get it over or joined onto that object that it starts to kind of go a little bit dark. I might want to push that down into the object some. And if I like where that's positioned, I could go ahead and group those. So when I group a solid object with a whole object in Tinkercad, it's going to cut that hole away from the solid object. So it looks now like there's a hole there, but there really isn't one in the object until I group those together. So again, I can click on the first one, I can hold down Shift and click on the second one, which is my whole object. And then if I click group, it's going to cut that hole away from the thing. Now, if I orbit around, I can see that there is a hole that is gone from the middle of that object. So that's the subtractive method. That lets me take something and cut something away. One thing that's really fun about Tinkercad, though, is that any object can be solid or a hole. So for example, if I grabbed this polygon instead, and maybe I want to make this a little bit bigger, I could take any other shape and turn it into a hole that's cut away from that thing. So for example, I could grab my star here, and once I've dragged that out, over here in the shape menu that pops up, we can see that it's a solid, and right now it's colored yellow. But if I want to make that star into a hole, all I have to do is click on hole, and it turns transparent just like my box and my cylinder holes. Maybe I want to take that star and cut it out from the top of that polygon. So same kind of thing here. I'm going to grab this. Let's make that a little bit smaller here, and let's drag that in. And I'm going to move around a little bit so I can see where that is. It looks like it's hovering over it instead of actually on top of it. So I'm going to move it a little bit, and then I'll use that cone to drag it down some. I'll click and hold on the cone and push it down some into the object. You can see that it's kind of going into it now. So if I grab my mouse and I click and hold, I can drag a selection box around the whole thing. And then when I click group, you can see that it's cut that star shape away from my object. So your assignment for this activity is to use the additive and subtractive methods to create a new object of your own imagination. The only requirements are that you must use at least one additive process where you take one or more objects and join them together, as well as somehow using the subtractive process as well in the same object. So your new object needs to be made from at least a couple of different components, some that you've added together and some that you have used as wholes to cut away from that. Good luck and have fun.